introducing my 4 audience members.
If you don't whine, they'll think you're dead.
$120 billion. What would you do with it? Buy a new house? The world's biggest boat? Maybe even a private island? Probably the last thing that you would do with your money is use it to combat aliens. Now, the aliens I'm talking about are not the E.T. type of aliens, which will come down in a spaceship wielding laser guns. But what I'm talking about is called an invasive species. The U.S. Forest Service, on their website, defines an invasive species as this. A species is invasive when it becomes both non-native to the ecosystem in which it is found and capable of causing environmental, economic, or human harm. There are a lot of invasive species in Kentucky, and all over the globe as well. Some examples of which are found in Kentucky are kudzu, crayfish, and the purple loosestrife. But really, an invasive species doesn't have to be a fish or just an animal. It can be a bird or even a disease. Anything that can be transported outside of its native range and it can survive in a new environment is pretty much an invasive species. So today, it is my intent to describe to you the 4 major steps that an invasive species will go through before it becomes established an invasive species, and also the different types of environmental and economic harms that they may have. So with that said, there are 4 major steps that an organism will evolve through before it becomes an established invasive species. In my FYS class, taken at Thomas More College during the fall 2014 semester, my professor, Dr. Shannon Galbraith Kent, detailed many of these steps in our lectures, but a brief overview will do for today. Before it becomes invasive, it must exist naturally in a native range. Then it must spread. The thing that carries it from point A to point B is what's called its transport vector. After it's spread, it will become invasive in a new environment. This environment will probably mimic that of which it came from. Things like the climate will be the same and the type of soil that it grows in. Lastly, and most important method, or step, I should say, is control. It's very imperative that we take control of these invasive species before they take harm that cannot be reversed. So, with a better definition of what an invasive species is, let's move on to the negative impacts that they can have. The environmental effects of invasive species are catastrophically widespread. The main thing that they affect is what's called biodiversity. Loosely defined, biodiversity is the variety of plants and animals that exist on planet Earth. With less plants and fewer animals for beauty and ornamental purposes, and even less for tourism on places like the Galapagos Islands and Hawaii, the industry of tourism on many countries will implode, as that's their main source of revenue. But who cares if a certain tree or plant goes missing? How does that relate to you? Well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration each have several websites detailing different invasive insect species which can affect our major crops. Things like corn, potatoes, and lettuce are especially susceptible to invasive insect species. Some plants, such as the salt cedar found in Utah, can even dry up whole bodies of water. This partially explains why California is in such a big drought. But more important than our food and water resources is the fact that some invasive species can even be dangerous to humans. The feral pig in Hawaii is known for attacking humans, and different plants produce chemicals which, if ingested by humans, can cause adverse health effects, which in turn will make you very sick. However, unless you're a biologist or environmentalist, many of these environmental effects may have no meaning to you. However, in my short life, all I know is one thing, and that is that everyone talks money. The economic effects of invasive species are disastrous, both on the state, federal, and government levels. Approximately $120 billion is allocated out of the U.S. budget to combat invasive species. Some of this goes to the military, who uses it to wash off their tanks and trucks of potentially invasive species that may get on their wheels. One thing in particular, an article titled Implementing Policies to Control Invasive Plant Species was written by several leading biologists in the field of invasive species. It was published in the Bioscience Journal in 2013, and it says this, that out of that $120 billion, over half of it is used to combat plant species alone. Now, all this money that I've been talking about includes a lot of different things. It includes the materials and equipment and labor necessary to physically combat these invasive species. But it also includes money for education about them, flyers and posters which you can distribute to the public. It includes the money lost on housing in the housing market, as the presence of an invasive species can make a particular piece of land look undesirable to a potential buyer. It also covers the research and monitoring necessary to control these invasive species. In summary, biodiversity is important to all aspects of life, and that economic and environmental impacts that can come of invasive species are a direct result of the many thousands and millions of organisms which live on our planet, some of which can even be alien. I'm sure most of you never expected an attack from aliens, but here we are, in the 21st century, waging war and a battle against Mother Nature. For now, we are winning, but the odds are most certainly not in our favor. The threat of losing this war has never become more crucial, as global travel is becoming more and more prevalent in our society. Invasive species are adept at attacking our weaknesses, like our food supplies and our finances. If left uncontrolled, these villains can be as harmful as an atomic bomb, and much less predictable. And though their effects, some of which I've described, can be detrimental and vary in scope, technology is always improving and turning out new ways to combat these invaders. One day, we will have the upper hand in nature, but the only question that remains is this: will it be too late?
You gotta show us again.